Okay, so this is a brief history of how the Earth formed and everything that has happened since then until right now. It's going to go pretty quick, so hang on. So, 4.6 billion years ago, we get the formation of the Earth, caused by basically the gravity of sun and a whole bunch of dust, dirt, and debris forming, causing gravity, other things running into it, and we have Earth that is a. Let's get the next button. Here we go. And about 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth is all hot and lava. It's basically all lava, the whole thing. Nothing is cooled, nothing is solid. Something hits the Earth so big that it causes a chunk of the Earth to come off. And that basically is what makes our moon. The moon you see today is actually a portion of the Earth. We know that from a whole bunch of different scientific findings, including the fact that the same isotopes that are found on the moon are the same isotopes that are found on Earth, and they are approximately 4.5 billion years old. So at about 4.3 billion years, we get the iron catastrophe, which is very important, separates the Earth into layers and allows the Earth to begin to cool, and also begins our early atmosphere. Our early atmosphere was totally inhospitable to life. Humans could not have survived there in any way, shape, or form. But luckily, other organisms were able to. Not quite yet. We'll get there in just a second. And this atmosphere was made up of nitrogen, no oxygen, carbon dioxide, some ammonia, toxic gases, and things like that. It was not good for breathing, at least if you're a human or any other mammal for that matter. About 4 billion years ago, we get the oldest rocks on Earth. Of course, this is finally when the lava or magma cools and becomes solid. About 3.9 billion years ago, we get water, the earliest oceans form, and that pretty much allows us, or allows life, not us, but life to begin to get a foothold. And we get the first fossil evidence of prokaryotic bacteria. Now, we know from looking at asteroids and things like that, that there are amino acids, there are organic compounds that are already formed, floating around in the universe, in our solar system, etc. So we know most likely that there was quite a bit of organic material available to eat in the early oceans, and these bacteria were able to use that. Now, these are prokaryotic heterotrophs, so they were just eating and reproducing in their very simple bacteria way, but they were not the important one, which showed up at about, here we go, 3.5 billion years ago. We get the cyanobacteria. Now, this is a big jump for life because this goes from being heterotrophic to being autotrophic. Notice the blue-green algae. So now we have the stromatolites. We actually have fossils of these stromatolites as well. They can be found in Australia, along with the oldest rocks. And these were about 3.5 billion years ago. And this is what makes stuff so interesting, is because with the stromatolites, we now get the process of photosynthesis. We now get the process of producing oxygen. We now get a new food source for heterotrophs as well. Not the bacteria per se, but eventually there will be a food source for heterotrophs. And these blue-green algae are still here today. They're not in the form of stromatolites, but they are still, the blue-green algae are still found on our planet today. So photosynthesis produces oxygen, 3.5 billion. Four. Three. So 3 billion years ago, still stromatolites, still those simple bacteria, those heterotrophic bacteria, just producing oxygen, no other organisms on the planet. Whoops, got a little carried away. But a billion years have gone by, and still, the only thing the stromatolites are doing, photosynthesis. The only organisms on the planet, stromatolites and those basic heterotrophic bacteria, at least fossil evidence that we have of those. So basically, for the last billion years, stromatolites have been slowly changing our atmosphere. They've been taking out the carbon dioxide, they've been putting in oxygen, and beginning to, and a lot of the cleaning that goes on by those stromatolites. Our oceans are cleaning the air, and those stromatolites are changing the atmosphere. Now, it's still not suitable for humans yet, but it is much better. Now, about 1.5 billion years later, we finally get the beginning of an oxygenated atmosphere. And the evidence is very simple. If you think of what happens to a car or iron in the presence of oxygen, it does what? Hopefully you think rusts or oxidizes. And we can see that in the rock layers, and all of a sudden we see red iron or red rust in the rock layers because there was enough free oxygen to begin to oxidize the iron that was in the rocks, which turned them red. Anyways, that's our evidence for the beginning of an oxygenated atmosphere. Still, that's our first pollution crisis, but that's the changing of the atmosphere, basically. Still, only an organism. We have about 1.7 billion years ago, we get our first eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotes meaning, of course, the presence of a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. We still have our stromatolites and we still have our simple single-celled bacteria, our heterotrophs. We have a bunch of new single-celled, different eukaryotes that are beginning. Life is still only single-celled, multi-celled organisms, and that has gone on. You can see Earth there. It's kind of the continent. There's no real continents per se, but the plates, this tectonic plates, are still doing their normal thing. They're moving, and everything's changing. All life is only found in the oceans. No life is found on land at all. And finally, after 2.5 billion years, we finally get multi-celled, soft-bodied organisms. These are worms, single and multi-celled organisms. We still have those very basic bacteria and stromatolites, those cyanobacteria that are doing photosynthesis. Once again, still no life on land. There's nothing like that. But we get our first marine invertebrates. Yes, that's right. Jellyfish have been around for 900 million years. And finally, 600 million years ago, we get our first real look at plants, underwater organic, underwater autotrophs that are basically providing a food source and starting a food chain for more advanced organisms, which we're going to see here in just a second. About 543 million years ago, we get our first hard plants. This is really an explosion known as the Cambrian explosion of life. We get all different kinds of life forms, like stuff that's totally crazy that you would never see. And of course, we get life migrating onto land at about 470 million years ago. And of course, it's not animal life that's migrating, it's plant life, because animals aren't going to go there unless there is food sources. So now we have the food chain is basically setting itself up. We have plants, we have organisms that eat the plants, and then we have organisms that eat the animals that eat the plants. So we have our food chain setting up, and it basically creates an arms race. 438 years ago, we get our first mass extinction. Almost all life is still underwater. We have our first seeded plants. We have our first amphibians, organisms making their way from land, from water to land, and then back, of course, to lay their eggs and reproduce. We get another mass extinction at 367 million years ago, and we're going to talk about these later on. These mass extinctions are actually very important. Because even though they kill off a lot of organisms, they also open up a lot of room for evolution to take place, is what we're going to be focusing on, of course. And as that process goes on, as those mass extinctions take place, we get rid of a bunch of organisms, and life very quickly fills those through evolution and mutations and basically different ways of taking care of or finding niches in life. 300 million years ago, we have forests on land, we have amphibians, reptiles, insects. That pill bug on the bottom was actually around 6 feet long. That's right, a pill bug that's bigger than you are for the most part. You could actually ride on top of these pill bugs. That's how big they were. And it's attributed to a higher level of oxygen in the atmosphere than we have today. I don't know if that's correct or not, but it's attributed to those large insects that were there. So this is the origin of many animals as well. Once again, 245 million years ago, you can see Pangea there. That is the famous Pangea of one supercontinent that will eventually divide into the continents that we know today. And we get another mass extinction. We don't know exactly what caused these mass extinctions. We have guesses to what caused these mass extinctions, but we don't know exactly why. 90% of all species perish, which leads us to the age of the dinosaurs. First mammals show up. That's right, there were mammals during the age of the dinosaurs, but not humans. And that's 200 million years ago. And these dinosaurs roamed the earth for about 140 million years. They were the dominant organisms on the planet. And we still have our single-celled organisms. We still have our jellyfish. We still have sharks. Sharks have been around for about 600 million years. About 600 million years. Was that right? Yeah, I think so. And we still have the cyanobacteria and things like that. Obviously, plants, we had our first ferns and gymnosperms, which are just basically different versions and ways of reproducing for plants. Plants and animals are sexually reproducing as well. And we only have small mammals, no large mammals. As you can guess, the only reason we don't have any large mammals is because anytime there are large mammals, what happens to them? That's right, the dinosaurs eat them. So large mammals are not a very good thing to be at this point in time. Only the smallest mammals are the ones that were able to survive, able to hide. About 100 million years ago, we have our first birds, we have our first placental mammals, and we have our first flowering plants. And finally, our last mass extinction 65 million years ago, partially caused by the 7-mile asteroid that hit the Earth. And it technically threw up enough dirt and debris into the atmosphere that caused incredible amounts of cooling. That cooling and a lot of other factors that go along with that also caused the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. Now, of course, if there was no mass extinction of the dinosaurs, there would be no large mammals, which means there would be no humans, if you think about it that way. So without mass extinctions, humans most likely never would have shown up on the planet. Especially this last mass extinction, which took out the dinosaurs and made way for what we know today as the Apothecine era, which is Apothecine, I think that's right, and that is the age of humans. About the last million years or so, we've had 3 million years approximately, we've had humans on the planet. Different versions of humans. Homo sapiens is being the dominant one, the only one that's left of about the 12 different versions or species of humans that we have had on the planet. And for about the last 100,000 years, the Homo sapiens have been the only ones that have been on the planet. And finally, of course, we have the dominance of flowering plants, insects, mammals, and birds. Birds, of course, the living relatives of the dinosaurs. So that ends our introduction into evolution, giving a quick look at the timeline of Earth, because if you can't really understand the timeline of Earth, evolution makes it much more difficult to understand evolution as well, because evolution is not like today, tomorrow, and the next day. Evolution is hundreds of thousands of hundreds of millions of years in order to take place. All right, so you're going to have 3 parts to your notes that are going to be coming up, part 1, part 2, and part 3 of evolution. And your guided notes will all be one packet that you will be able to go through in each one of those parts. I'm trying to keep these to 15 minutes or less. I'm at 14 minutes and 32 seconds, so I'm done. If you have questions, please hit me up on Remind. See you guys soon, hopefully.